Hello, I'm Ronald Day, Associate Vice President for the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy, and welcome to Both Sides of the Bars, a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal justice system from various perspectives, including those impacted most by the criminal justice system. We discuss critical questions about how the current system works, its intersections with social justice, and the highlighting of efforts that are being made to improve the lives of everyone that is affected by it. We ask you, the viewer, to spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments with us on Twitter at The Fortune Society. And I'm sitting in today for our usual host, Marlon Peterson, and he sends his regards to everyone. So I'm going to introduce you to our guest today. And first we have Deanna King, who is the community organizer at the Education from the Inside Out. The issue that we will be talking about today is access to higher education for people impacted by the criminal justice system. And through organizing communities that have been adversely impacted by the criminal justice system and individuals who are residents at the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision facilities, you have been working to further get people access to higher education for community members who are incarcerated and those who have returned home. And Deanna she is an alumnus of Florida A&M University, where you study journalism and photography, and the New School, where you receive your BA in social inquiry. And we also have with us Lorna Woodham, who Lorna recently began working with Dignity in Schools campaign. She believes that the path to healing our communities begins with ensuring equal access to education. Lorna has participated in leadership positions at the Osborne Association and Healing Communities. As a dedicated social justice activist with much personal experience concerning the effect of incarceration on families, Lorna has spoken on panels at the Silverman School of Social Work, at the Osborne Association, at Riverside Church, and Camp Promise, a camp for children with parents who are incarcerated. Lorna holds a BA cum laude in anthropology from Columbia University and is currently pursuing her MDiv, MSSW at Union Theological Seminary and the Columbia School of Social Work. So thank you for being on both sides of the bars. So with the theme being access to higher education, I want to start with a question for you both. And it's, why is it imperative that higher education programs be present and accessible in correctional facilities? And how does it impact the rate of reentry and safety inside of the facility and employment opportunities for people once they're released from correctional facilities?
Definitely, and thank you for having us on, Ronald.
Sure. It's our pleasure.
I guess before we answer this question, it's important to look at who is currently residing inside correctional facilities and what educational background they come from. If you look at New York State and the residents that populate corrections facilities, we find that a lot of the residents are wholly undereducated. So 16% of incarcerated persons inside corrections had a tested reading score of a 0 to 4th grade level, 12% at a 5th to 8th grade level, and 12% at a 9th to 12th grade level, leaving only 59% with a verified high school degree or a GED. So we're dealing with a population of people who haven't had access to education prior to entering correction facilities. And while DOCS recognizes that it's important that there's some form of education inside of corrections, it's really limited to high school equivalency. So while access to higher ed might be attainable at certain correctional facilities, sure, any person who enters a correctional facility can get their GED. We understand this is significant because access to education is one of the greatest tools we have to lower recidivism rates inside a correctional, and once a person reenters. Sure. When you look at some of the private and prison programs like BARD Initiative and Hudson Link and Mercy College that operates at Bedford Hills, sure, they have a dramatically reduced recidivism rates as compared to the national rate, which is 4%. I believe BARD Initiative has a recidivism rate of 4. Mercy College has a recidivism rate around 7.7, and Hudson Link has a recidivism rate of like 1%.
And these are studies that they actually done?
Yes, these are. Right. So what we have is an evidence-based model that has been proven to work, sure, and that could lower cost of incarcerations over time. studies have also shown, while these studies aren't quantitative, that safety inside of correctional facilities is increased when there's a presence of a higher education program. Correctional guards who have been interviewed for certain reports can have attested to the fact that they've seen a decrease of violent crime infractions and just an overall more manageable prison environment. That can be related to the fact that if a person who's in a prison college program is a part of a violent infraction, they can lose the privilege of access to education, or that the person who's a part of these programs has just more coping tools and critical thinking tools that limit your involvement inside of some of these in sort of violent infractions. So these are all things that we really tout as far as the need to reinstate TAP funding inside of correctional facilities so that the funding is accessible and that all DOCS facilities can have some sort of in-prison college program.
And this is something that the Education from the Inside Out Coalition has worked on for a number of years now?
Yes. Glenn Martin and Vivian Nixon, both leaders inside of correctionals, I know, as you know, corrections reform, as I'm sure you know, have both been leaders in this work. Last year, Andrew Cuomo introduced a plan that would have reinstated college programs inside of 10 DOCS facilities.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that plan hit sort of a roadblock, and we've been unable to I guess, figure out what's going to be our next step in that. Okay. But we've always come from a place where we understood that education is a priority when it comes to reentry.
Okay, got it. So the governor is seemingly in support of funding college programs inside of prisons because of the data that you just mentioned, the lower incidence inside of facilities and so forth. But right now, there's a snafu, or
yes,
there's no progress that's really been made insofar as pushing that agenda item.
Yes, as far as we know, Andrew Cuomo introduced the plan last year. Republican backlash was really swift.
Yes,
We kind of lost a narrative battle on our front because a lot of conservatives were allowed to push rhetoric that said that if we are funding in-prison college programs, we are taking taxpayer dollars and investing in people who they deem as criminals, not really taking into account that there's an array of reasons where people are incarcerated, nor are they taking into account the fact that education inside correctional facilities has a significant impact on rates of reentry. So while we have no qualms with spending $60,000 a year on incarcerating a person, the investment of spending $5,000 a year on educating a person and reducing their rates of reentry is something that New York State residents haven't really attached to as an idea for reform.
Exactly. That's great. Thank you for that. So to either you or to Lorna, so what are the potential impacts of reinstating TAP and Pell for individuals that are currently incarcerated?
I would say something that's important would be the effect it has on communities. Not only are they less risk inside, once they come home, they're able to help their families, they're able to give back to communities in a better, more productive way. They're just better members.
Sure. I mean, you alluded to the fact that some people in the community have said, why provide college education to people who are incarcerated? They've committed crimes, right? They've harmed the community in some way. So why should we be spending money when, like, other people who are in the community have to pay or what have you? So, you know, what do you say to these folks who are on the other side of the dial?
One, to begin, reinstating TAP for people who are currently incarcerated does nothing to reduce the amount of TAP that the traditional student would receive who's trying to go to college. We also at AIO believe that the cost of college has, the cost of college has increased exorbitantly through the years. Okay. And a lot of that cost has been due to the rising growth of the prison industry. Okay. So in the early 90s and the early aughts, we've seen a lot of government funding being used to fund corrections and a lot of money being divested from educational programs. What we want to really strongly state is the fact that if we are spending less money on corrections over time, that money can then be reinvested in educational programs that would benefit the public good as a whole. So I just think people need to sort of think long-term growth as opposed to thinking about how they feel emotionally when it comes to doing really like reform-oriented and rehabilitative-oriented programs inside of correctional facilities.
So to your original point, then, access to TAP or Pell is basically needs-based then?
Yes.
So someone who is eligible would get access to it, and someone who's eligible inside of a prison would get access to
Yes.
it. So that argument then is kind of nullified that people in the community have to spend money, right? And someone inside doesn't.
Exactly.
Okay, got it. All right, so another question for you. How does criminal background screening affect educational opportunities for individuals who have been involved in the criminal justice system? Because we know there's this issue about some colleges having the box on their applications and that being potentially, discriminatory in some way. Some people deciding that they don't want to, go through the rigmarole of providing and producing documentation. So there are a number of issues associated with it. So what is the coalition's position on having the box and how it affects educational opportunities? So either one, Lorna or Deanna, can answer that question.
You want to take this one, Lorna?
Sure. The box discriminates and it prevents and it often stops stops individuals who are clearly qualified to go into college just by the box being there.
Okay,
They'll see the box and it hesitates, and they hesitate,
sure.
and they refuse to even go further. And in fact, even after they have perhaps used the box and they've been approved and they've gotten into college, sometimes, for instance, if they apply for an internship, it may then later on go back and backfire on them
Okay.
and affect them during their internship.
Okay.
For instance, I know of a young man who was in school. He applied for an internship. He was accepted. And then later on, midway through the internship, a background check came back and he was then removed from the internship, which directly impacted the young people that he was working with and also him and potentially his ability to graduate.
Wow.
So it has far-reaching effects.
And Deanna, what do you have to say to that particular point?
Yes, I completely agree with Lorna. And to speak further on EIO's position, last year we introduced the Fair Access to Education Act,
Okay.
which would bar schools from asking about a person's criminal conviction or felony record during the application process.
Okay.
And so to deter that, not to delay that process until after acceptance. So instead of having to check the box on the application and having that information be used to qualify you as a student or not, you will be accepted, and then on some other forms, through some other process, you will be asked about your criminal background. And at that point, once accepted, a school cannot take away your access to education. They cannot revoke your acceptance
Okay.
after the criminal background screening. What we find is that a lot of students who would be qualified based on their grades and other achievements are being sort of pushed out or excluded from educational opportunities because of the supplemental directives that they are called upon to produce after they check the box during the application process. So how it works is a student, they go through the application and they get to the question and they fill it out and they submit it. Not soon after that, they receive a form from the school asking them to provide certain supplemental documents. And some of these documents can be almost impossible to obtain. If not impossible, they come at a cost to the student. And if we're dealing with a student who's recently re-entering from a facility, they might not have those funds immediately available to pay for a DCJS report. Also, with schools who do ask for certain paperwork like the DCJS report, that report has all your arrests, all your convictions, even things that have been sealed. So schools, employers don't even have access to that information. But why does the student then have to get that report at their own cost and then provide it for the student for review?
So some of the colleges are requesting that particular documentation?
Yes. Not all colleges.
Okay.
And another issue especially as it relates to schools within the SUNY system, is that there is no sort of blanket directive for how schools engage with students with criminal histories. So that allows for individual schools to set their own processes. And a lot of times these processes aren't defined by anybody who has any understanding of criminal justice and criminal justice reform. So we have found that schools have asked for campus security guards or local police to sit on these sort of advisory committees that a student then has to sort of state their case in front of. And then after that, these specific bodies who are sort of chose arbitrarily get to determine whether or not that particular student has access or not. So while a student may be able to get past all these barriers and go through this gauntlet and get access, we want to know, like, why are they even being put through this process? If you look at the research, there is no evidence that would suggest that not doing criminal background screenings on campuses increases or diminishes public safety on campus. All CUNY schools within the city of New York, school that's service mostly like people who would fit within these categories, don't ask the question. Like, none of the schools do. And they do not show an increase in public violence on campus or any sort of crime on campus. So there's no sort of evidence to suggest that this model is effective. What we do see is that it leads to application attrition, which is the fact that students, they see the question, or potential students see the question, they feel the stigma attached to it. They've gone through this before, either by in housing or employment, and they feel that that process of exclusion beginning to happen again, and they're either they don't complete the application and they don't submit it, and then you're disqualified from acceptance just because you haven't completed the application. So there's so many unmeasurables in this. Some things we can't really qualify because we haven't spoken to the people who are just completely deterred from this experience, who aren't measured by SUNY's application process. What we want is the Fair Access to Education Act to pass, so that schools will no longer ask the question during the application process and just really create access.
Got it. So there generally is some misconceptions. When you say remove the box from an application, some folks think that that means that schools will not be able to make a decision about someone who is coming to the campus, and you're saying that's not true. You're saying that it basically delays the screening, so they will be able to ask for additional information, is what EIO is proposing?
Correct. We aren't taking away schools' right to ask the question.
Okay.
Like you say, we're asking for them to delay it, and that's to determine things such as housing and supportive services, not to revoke admissions altogether.
Okay.
We just want schools to really recognize the fact that they sort of have an institutional responsibility to provide education for people who have been historically removed from educational realms. So what is your goal as an educational institution? Is it to be, in a way, complicit with these sort of archaic criminal justice practice, or is it to challenge that and to evolve and to be an ally in this space and sort of another deterrent or a barrier?
Okay. So if public safety hasn't increased on a large university system like CUNY, right, then why is it that some colleges would continue to ask for and sometimes require this information, and how do we change this paradigm so that people who have been impacted by the criminal justice system can get access to higher education? Because I would be thinking, if I'm someone who's concerned about public safety, if the data doesn't reflect that schools are less safe, then why would I continue to do something like this? I mean, isn't it just about trying to get this information to the powers that be so some of these policies can be changed?
Exactly. I mean, I wish I knew the answer to the question. It would make the advocacy effort a lot easier. But I think it's also that placebo effect of safety as well. Okay. So if we can ask the question, if we know it's coming, we can sort of guess and sort of figure out what's going to happen, but it really doesn't work that way. Sure. Most of the crime that happens on campus is done by first-time offenders. You can't really measure for circumstantial criminal acts. Sure. What we want schools to know is that their process of criminal background screening has little to no effect on safety on campus. Okay. And what you are is missing out on students who could really positively impact the culture of these schools, have significant roles inside the classrooms, speak to experiences that a traditional student can't really attest to. I know from my own experience, I'm a new school student. A lot of my sort of indoctrination on criminal justice reform came from a class that I took on criminals and communities by Professor Bahia Muhammad, who's now doing an Inside Out program at Howard University in DC. But I also, new school asked the question, so how in one avenue do you provide students with opportunity to learn about CJ reform, but you're also sort of facilitating these processes on the back end. So just to think about being more inclusive and opening up space. I think if that's a argument that we can really push with SUNY Central and really hold them accountable to their core values, which is inclusion and diversity. That's something a way we can sort of make headway and sort of change the narrative.
Got it. And as we move towards the end of the show, what are some policy recommendations that the EIO Coalition has that could move the agenda forward?
Yes, so right now, we are asking that Governor Andrew Cuomo put a line in the budget for TAP reinstatement, to provide that funding in there. If that doesn't happen, we are asking that they move on S 1367, which is a bill that's in the Senate, and it is a TAP ban repealer, so that it would repeal the 1995 ban that George Pataki enforced, and that way people who are incarcerated would then again be eligible for TAP funding. We are also asking for the Fair Access to Education Act to be passed. The Fair Access to Education Act is currently residing in the Crimes Committee. If people who are watching this show can research their districts and see if one of their senators happens to be in the Crimes Committee, it would be great to reach out to them and begin having those conversations and implore them to move these particular bills out of their committee and onto the floor. The TAP restoration bill is a bill that has been sitting in the House for a significant amount of time. And it's one of those bills that's not really going to move without community support. And raising awareness and increasing visibility about this particular issue is going to be really necessary. We lost the narrative argument when it came to the private programs. But the people who are mostly impacted by this, people who have loved ones who are incarcerated, who don't know that higher education is something that has such a significant impact, need to take the lead inside of these in these meetings with these senators and say this is something that we demand. So at EIO, we are really doing a lot of community engagement, a lot of community meetings where we're just really just having conversation about this particular issue. As an organizer, I've gone out and talked to many people, and if I knock on a door and we start talking about these issues, instantly somebody starts to talk about a loved one who's incarcerated. They either tell me that, I have a brother or a cousin, and they received their master's inside of while they're incarcerated, and they tell me what they did, and they didn't know that not everybody had access to these programs. So it's just like taking these people and making sure that they're centered in the work, that their stories are heard and resonate more than anybody who's speaking out of fear or ignorance.
Got it. And Lauren, I know you've worked diligently to help get some of these issues some traction. You've hosted some support groups. You've sponsored discussions and videos. So what does the groups that you're involved with have to say about policy recommendations?
That we need to be more inclusive, I think, of community members. We need to continue reaching out and getting people to move beyond the stigma of having a loved one who's incarcerated. I think that prevents a lot of people from coming forward. So we need to find a way to promote family members to be willing to step forward.
And you've been doing that, right?
Yes.
How have you done it?
I've done that through having a group that meets twice a week, and we meet to talk about different issues that come up and find ways to support each other and or our loved ones who are incarcerated.
Got it. So before we close out, any final comments about access to higher education for people who are transitioning out of correctional facilities?
Comments. That it's a right. I think that we lose sight of the fact that education is a right. And it's a right that everyone's entitled to, whether you're incarcerated or you're free. And we should work to make sure that everyone gets that right.
Yes. Michael J. Love, who is an EIO member who currently is a resident at Fishkill Correctional Facility, sent me this essay about education inside corrections and public safety, and is society really serious about public safety? And in it, he wrote that education and higher education has been sort of understood as a privileged right for a privileged few instead of an unassailable right for everybody. And to really just talk more about what Lorna already brought up is that higher education is a tool that everybody needs in order to get employment that provides a person with a living wage and to be a productive part of society. So if we are spending all this money to incarcerate community members who, in 97% of these people are going to come home, what are we telling them that they are coming home to if we're not investing in their future?
Sure. And at the Fortune Society, we've worked closely with the coalition, and we want to continue to do that. I mean, as you talked about previously with the data, I mean, we know that the more you invest in communities, the greater the likelihood that people are going to not be involved in crime, and they'll have access to employment, they have access to education, and so forth. So, you know, we're excited about the work that's happening at the coalition, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. And thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having
So,
us.
thank you to our guests for joining us on both sides of the bars today, and thank you in TV Land for joining us as well. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on our website at fortunesociety.org or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Ronald Day as we critically look at both sides of the bars. Thank you.
Thanks,
Appreciate having you on the show.